One of the things that we really want to do during these alumni gatherings is to challenge you to keep thinking theologically and biblically. And so my task just now is to take you into the book of Ecclesiastes for a little while and set a tone for the day, I trust, around Ecclesiastes, because I believe this is a very important book for us. And there's some pretty poor readings of it, I think, as there are of the other wisdom literature books in Old Testament, Proverbs amongst them. And so what I want to do today is challenge you to freshly consider the book of Ecclesiastes and to take with you a starting point for your own study. Now, I'm not imagining that in this short time that I have this morning that I'm going to be able to give you all that I could give you, but I hope to give you an outline which will start to get us there. And then we'll stretch our legs, and I'll then introduce our keynote speakers today, Barbara and Lex. We've entitled this A Gospel for Life, Ecclesiastes, and a Theology for Loving Each Season. And I believe that the book of Ecclesiastes does address that question. As I commence, I want to say that as a human being, I want a gospel for life, not a gospel against life. Not a gospel that diminishes or reduces or excludes or partialises, but a gospel for life. I think when I became a Christian, when I was 19, Sydney University, 1971, I thought being a Christian was not doing things, stopping, pulling back. The more I've read about the gospel and about the scriptures and about Jesus, it seems to me that it's more invitational into life than excluding of life. And so as I've thought about this, I want a gospel, first of all, that's real. I want a gospel for real life. I don't want an escape gospel. I don't want an idealistic gospel. I want a gospel that stands up in moments that are mundane as well as tragic. I want a gospel that is both relevant for the momentary and the mundane and the daily, and for the unexpected and the tragic. I want a gospel that invites me to flourish. I want a gospel for flourishing life, not a reduced, constraining gospel. I want good news for full humanness. I want something that embraces goodness and truth and beauty. And I want a gospel for all of life. That is not just for one season, for when I'm young and ambitious or old and perhaps pessimistic. I want a gospel for all the seasons of life that meets my humanness at every point of life. And I think today we're going to be talking about the gospel for all of life, because we want intergenerational conversations between our current students, our younger students, and our older students, our graduate students. We believe that it's really important for a rich human community to be a meeting of those who are in different phases of life. So I want a gospel for life. Recently, we took our board meeting, our NGC meeting, the National Governing Council meeting, to Christchurch. First time in my recollection that we've done this, and we met on the Christchurch campus. And after the meeting, we went and surveyed the houses in some of the suburbs which are being totally reconstructed, some of the suburbs where streets are being cleared, where there will be no building of houses any longer, where there'll be only green space in the future. And we saw horrendous, despairing images of houses just barely standing, buttressed by scaffolding, houses like this, house after house after house. It was very, very sad, and very helpful for the board, I think, to be on our campus in Christchurch and to see the work that will be needed for years, if not decades, if not longer than that, to reconstruct this city and people's lives, family lives, heritage, which has gone to dust, as it were. I want a gospel that somehow prepares me and comforts me and strengthens me for this. I want to affirm today that that's the sort of gospel we come to confront in the book of Ecclesiastes. And in the time we have today, I want to broadly give you a sweep of theology from Ecclesiastes, commencing with these overarching sayings from the book. Ecclesiastes commences with the words of the preacher in 1:2, vanity of vanities, vanity of vanities, all is vanity, and concludes in 12:8 with almost the same words. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. The preacher is our word for the Hebrew word kohelet, which means teacher or preacher or the congregational community leader, something of that sort. This idea of the teacher, the kohelet. And the teacher or the preacher whose teachings make up this book can be summarised by these words: vanity of vanity, vanity of vanity, all is vanity. Now, some people have taken that to mean that Ecclesiastes has a quite negative or pessimistic theology. And I want to contend with that today. These words, vanity, vanity, vanities, these are used more than 30 times in the book. And this is a translation of the Hebrew word hevel, H-E-B-E-L, hevel, from which the name Abel, for example, comes in Genesis 4, hevel. Hevel in Scripture usually means something like breath or breeze. It's the idea that things pass away, that things move on, that things are transient and passing. I don't believe that the author is saying that things are meaningless, as some translations have it. I don't believe the book is saying life is meaningless. I think a better translation of Hevel is everything cannot be grasped. Everything is changing and moving, and including our lives. We pass through seasons. We are mortal. We are limited. And we will die. And we will stand before the judgment of God. And the world is like that. There is this sort of a sense of brevity, transience, passing, and nothing lasting. We cannot hold on to our lives. We depend on God for this. God is the creator, and God is not passing away, but we are all passing away, and the world that we know and knew is passing away. Vanity of vanities, then, might best be translated something like the merest of breaths. The merest of breaths, everything is a breath. Now, this is a beautiful thought which gives rise to a beautiful theology. And I want to say that there are two key ideas for me that come from this use of the word hevel. The first one is this: wisdom is accepting and coming to grips with the fact that life is ephemeral or passing away and transient. We can't keep it. We can't keep our health or our wealth or our youth, the three gold and silver bronze medallions of consumerism and modernity. It's not only ephemeral, it's also elusive. There's a sense in Ecclesiastes that life resists our attempt to control it. Not only can't we keep it, but we never can control it. We always want to keep the beautiful moment, control the future so that it's not changing or threatening or frightening. But ephemeral and elusive, it's passing away, it's resistant. It can't be kept by us, says Kohelet, and it can't be controlled by us. And wisdom in Ecclesiastes is coming to grips with the fact that God can do that, but we cannot. We are like God, image of God, but we are not God. God alone is God. I found this lovely video clip of waves on the beach. Can you turn it up just for a moment, Jen, and then turn it down? Just sit with this for a minute. Turn the sound down. Kohelet would look at that and say, you know, you didn't make that and you can't change it. But you also can't keep it. You can't grasp it, you can't control it. And whatever you do, human being, in the world that Kohelet wrote to, you realise that only God can do this sort of thing. And we watch it and we sense our limitation. We're not God. And not only that, but we can't actually grasp the moment. We can be amazed by it, we can be stirred by it, but we can't actually hold it. In Ecclesiastes 7:13, the writer says, "Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what God has made crooked?" You know, there are limitations to human endeavour. There are limitations to human control. There are some things that we just can't change. So what should we do in terms of Ecclesiastes? How should we live? What is wisdom? Should we surrender to despair and melancholy, or should we embrace hope, or carefree living, or denial, or in modern terms pursue transhumanism and try to escape our limits through robotics, through eugenics? What should we do? Should we contemplate suicide and an early death? Well, the writer of Ecclesiastes would say none of those really. And I want to go to the poem in chapter 3, which I think is very wonderful and sets the tone for this book. Let's read the words. "There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace." Why is this poem so important in the book of Ecclesiastes? Because one of the most important things about wisdom in this book is that we have a theology of the times, that we embrace a theology of the times. And this poem, the way it's structured, 2 groups of 7 with sort of a spectrum of a human experience, is a poem about everything. It's meant to be a poem that circumvents and covers all of life. It's meant to be a poem that covers every activity, everything, every activity. It's a poem about the entirety of humanness. And in the 2 groups of 7, 14 contrasts, the Ecclesiastes writer, the Kohelet, is saying, do you understand that you are in the times that God controls? And that being in those times beckons you to embrace the rhythms of your life and learn contentment, that you are not God and God is good. So be at peace with God and the creation in the times. Laidlaw and Johnson are 2 modern theorists who have argued that in our modern world we think of time in terms of money. We think of time as a commodity. And so in their work, they point to some of the metaphors that we use for time in our current speech. They come up with these. You're wasting my time. How do you spend your time these days? That flat tyre cost me an hour. I've invested a lot of time in her. I don't have enough time to spare. You're running out of time. You need to budget your time. Put aside some time for sport. Is that worth your while? Do you have much time left? You don't use your time profitably. He's living on borrowed time. I lost a lot of time when I got sick. Now, these are just some of the popular sayings around time, and there's many, many others, but the point that Laidlaw and Johnson are making is that most frequently in current modern society, we think of time in terms of money or commodity. You've got it, you lose it, you spend it, you invest it, it's profitable or not. Time has become this objective that we either lose or gain, that we either invest or waste. We need a theology of time. And one of the things that Ecclesiastes would encourage us all to do is think well about our times and about time. The scriptures would teach us that time is a gift of the Creator. And you'll never run out of time because God invites you into eternity. Time is a gift of the Creator. It is a creational gift which has been impacted by the fall and is being redeemed under the sovereign love of God and finally under the lordship of Christ. God made time as a gift to us to inhabit. And then God himself indwelt time and became present among us as a time-loving, time-present, incarnational God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. In the New Testament, there are a couple of significant texts about time which may well flow from a theology grounded in Ecclesiastes. One of them is this one from Galatians 4. When the set time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that we might receive adoption to sonship. God steps into time. God inhabits time. God embraces time. Time is Godful. Godful. This idea of time starts to rethink about it in terms of relationality and presence rather than commodity and money. In 1 Corinthians 10, Paul tells the church, these things happened to them, Old Testament Israel, as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the culmination of the ages has come. And by that he means, Christians, you of all people understand that you are living in a time of transition or change when God has brought the new into the old, the future into the present, redemption into the fall, when Christ has set up hopefulness in the midst of mortality. There is this lovely sense in which we stand between the times of heaven and earth, eternity in the present. And so I would encourage you to think through your theology of time. Recently we've had in Aotearoa, New Zealand, John Swinton, who is a theologian of disability from the University of Aberdeen. And his most recent book I would certainly recommend to you is called Dementia. It's an exploration of being human with dementia. And in that book he tells a story about John and Goldingay. John Goldingay was here last year. And Anne, John's wife, who has died after having had severe multiple sclerosis. John cared for Anne for many, many years after they married, the last 10, when she was in a wheelchair and increasingly incapacitated. And for quite a number of those years unable to speak. Swinton tells this story about John and Ann Goldingay. He says at the beginning of one of his lectures at Fuller Seminary in the US, Goldingay gave an invitation to students to join him and his wife Anne for pancakes at their home the following week. Anne, who has since passed away, had severe multiple sclerosis and was significantly disabled, having lost the ability to move and speak. Goldingay informed his students that Anne probably wouldn't recognise or remember them, but he urged them to take the time to speak with her just the same. He said something like this, quote, "She probably won't remember you afterwards, but in that moment she will appreciate you." Swinton goes on, Goldingay's encouragement to his students was born out of his deep love for his wife and the desire to affirm to her and to others the meaningfulness of her presence. He had learned to meet with her in the moment, and he wanted others to share that moment. It might only be a moment, but that moment mattered. Now that's a theology that comes out of a good reading of Scriptures, and it's in Ecclesiastes. Swinton talks a great deal about the sacrament of the present moment. The sacrament of the present moment. He says a sacrament is a sign of grace. And he argues that being human is learning to live in the moment with God in the present moment. Now, what consumerism has done is separate that moment from the narrative of our lives and make it a sort of a standalone event in which we try to maximise the commodity of the moment. Now, we're not talking about that. We are saying, however, that our humanness consists of a presence for the other, a presence with the other, a presence with God in the moment. We're told, and it's true, that we're living in a culture of distraction, where we multitask and do 1,000 things apart from paying attention to each other in the moment. And Ecclesiastes is saying, understand what it means to live in time. What it means to live in time, at least at one level, is to be fully present for the other in the moment. And Swinton argues in his book on dementia that even if I am losing, apparently, my memory, most memories that are held about me are actually held by others and by God. In fact, my humanness is not constituted by my memory of myself. It's constituted by God's memory of me and by the memories of others of me. So, challenge. How will others remember us? As present in the moment for others, or as preoccupied with self in the moment and with every other thing under the sun? Being content with the times, not trying to hold them and control them and act like God. That's wisdom in Ecclesiastes. And as we move on from this poem and this portion of the New Testament now, we see how that outworks in chapter 3, verse 9 and following. In chapter 3, verse 9, we read these words. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden that God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. Now, in Ecclesiastes, the author is setting up a contrast, and friends of mine who lecture in this book in Australia are arguing, and so is a commentary that I've been reading, and I'm going to mention that to you at the end. But this is the key to Ecclesiastes, so give us your attention on this one. The contrast, and it's in this passage, is between living for gain and living for gift. In this passage, Collier starts by saying, so what do workers gain? And he's actually not saying it's not worth working and striving and being productive. He's not saying that at all. He's simply saying, don't do that thinking that somehow you can take your profit, your bonuses, your reward with you. Don't work for gain. See work as God's gift. Don't make your humanness shaped by this driven desire to accumulate and consume and gather and gain and profit and bonus and keep your lot. He's saying don't see life like that at all. He's saying the alternative and the basic choice in this book is to see your life as gift, work as gift, humanness as gift, times as gift, and live freely in the times out of gratitude for the gift, prepared to let go of the gift when required. Corlett is arguing that frustration, anxiety, despair, and eventually human failure is caught up with this driven human pursuit of gain. And he's saying, look, God's got all that under control. Live out of gift. Live for gift. Live life as a gift. He's saying you can choose to be responsive and thankful for life. You can hold it lightly and be prepared to move on. You can be thankful for who you are, what you've got, but recognise that you can't keep it. Or you can live as an independent, self-made, demanding human who holds life tightly, resisting change, perhaps even desperate never to let go. Live for your gain and you'll lose it all. And in the meantime, your work will be drudgery and your human life will be frustrated. In this passage, he says, look, God has made everything beautiful in its time. And by that he means something, I think, like everything fits for you where you are in your time, but you can't keep it. And it's not yours to control. It's God's. But it's good, it's beautiful in its time. And God has put eternity in our hearts. And I think by that he means something like all of us as image of God, we know there's something more. We know there's something bigger. We know it sort of fits together and makes sense, but we can't grasp that because we're not God. So stop trying. Stop trying to give a meaning to everything. Stop asking questions that are impenetrable. Stop trying to be God. Be content that God is God and he loves you and he will judge you. And you can live under God's goodness and let go. This seems to be the advice of the Kohelet. And as a result, look at what he says about living. In 3:12, he says, I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and do good while they live. He actually says once you decide to live for gift and not for gain, then living well becomes easier. Living for the other, pursuing character, becoming a good human being, and finding contentment. In 3:22, he says, so I saw there is nothing better for people than to enjoy their work. This is their lot. And the word lot there means this is their portion. This is our portion. Enjoy what God's given you. Learn to enjoy it. Now, this is not saying that everything in the world is good at all times. There are challenges, there is sinfulness, etc. But he's saying, well, God is with you in that. You've got to come to a point where you accept your lot, as it were. And then in 5:18, he says, this is what I have observed to be good. It's appropriate for people to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their toilsome labour. Why do we work? According to the Kohelet, we work to work because it's a gift. And then in 8:15, he says, I commend the enjoyment of life There is nothing better for people under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. See how wisdom becomes this. I hold it lightly now. I'm resting in God is God and I am in the times. Again in 9:7, he says, go eat your food with gladness. Drink your wine with a joyful heart. God has already approved what you do. In 9:10, he says, look, whatever you do, whatever your hand finds to do it with all your might. In 11:6, sow your seed in the morning and at evening, let your hands not be idle, for you don't know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well. Go about your work, he says. And finally, in 11:9, you who are young, be happy while you are young. Let your hearts give you joy in the days of your youth. This is not a pessimistic book. This is not a book about the wearisome of life and how hard it is to be human and everything's a waste of time, it's all meaningless and we all should sort of opt out. Absolutely not. He's saying, learn how you fit in the times under God. Live for gift and not for gain. Develop a theology of presence in the times in which you find yourself. Well, at the end of the book, we have a terse summary. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God, keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. And as we finish talking about the Kohelet, just for now, we realise that as the book ends, the Kohelet doesn't know as much as we do. He is still living in an Old Testament era prior to the revelation of Jesus and the full awareness of the New Testament authors. And so as we move on to the New Testament, we find Jesus speaking as the Kohelet as well. And I want to give you just one of Jesus' stories, which I think picks up the Kohelet and what he has to say. Jesus speaks out of wisdom. And you will know, I think, the parable so-called of the rich fool in Luke 12. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. I want my gain." This is shaped by Old Testament wisdom. Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" He said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." He said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain, my gain. I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. I can hold it. I can control it. It's mine to keep. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry, but not on the basis of gift, on the basis of gain." God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. God is God. God is the judge. God holds the times. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?" Exactly the issue. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. You can't keep it. This is how it will be with those who store up things for themselves but are not rich toward God. What does it mean to be human in terms of Jesus? It means to have a bigger vision, a greater view of life and contentment, of the now and the future, of earthly and eternal. And to live out of gift sets us free to live wisely in that way. Well, I think the Apostle Paul was a wise writer. And as I come to a conclusion in this part of our talk, Paul says to the Philippians, "Rejoice in the Lord always." I will say it again, rejoice. Let your humility, your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. That could be Kohelet writing right there. Don't be anxious. Don't be anxious about anything. In every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Well, living in the 21st century as we are still in the mainstream cultural stories being driven to live for gain, driven to live with time as a commodity, impelled to think that everything is at risk all the time and we've got to hold it tightly to ourselves. We're living in a consumer world. We're living in a world that is fast-paced, where people are no longer present for one another in their times, where approaching death or age or loss is denied, where people like Goldingay loving Anne in her illness and debilitation are thought to be wasting their time. And yet Kohelet would say, actually, you can't waste time. You can be present in time faithfully with God or not. We are being driven to live beyond our means, financially, physically, and emotionally. Depression going through the roof in Western societies particularly, as we seek to challenge the limitations of humanness, deny our finiteness, deny our ageing, and press into an unwise keeping and controlling of the times. We must chart an alternative course as those who love the Lord. And I trust that as we are here together today, we can talk about what that looks like at different ages in different seasons of our lives. And this is one of the great benefits of us coming together as a full group. Let me mention a couple of commentaries that I would love you to purchase and look at, read, get from the library, that help you along the way. The one I think I would most highly recommend on Ecclesiastes is by Ian Provan. Ian was here last year, an Old Testament scholar from Regent College. Ian Provan, I-A-I-N, Ian Provan, P-R-O-V-A-N. I think it's in the new National Commentary application series. Well worth getting Ian Provan's commentary. Tremper Longman has also written on Ecclesiastes, and it's very, very good. And later on today, we're going to give you one of a couple of books by Scott McKnight. One of them is this one, Embracing Grace, Discovering the Gospel that Restores Us to God, Creation, and Ourselves. I just thought I'd read you a short quote from the book and then perhaps open this up for some discussion and questioning. Grace, as one author defines it, is like God saying to each one of us, here is your life. You might never have been, but you are, because the party wouldn't have been complete without you. Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Don't be afraid. I am with you. Nothing can ever separate us. It's for you I created the universe. I love you. There's only one catch. Like any other gift, the gift of grace can be yours only if you'll reach out and take it. Maybe being able to reach out and take it is a gift too. Take, Jesus says. Embrace me. You might get that later in the day, and you might get this one Life. Jesus Calls We Follow, 2 books by Scott McKnight.